Okay. Well, hello and good afternoon. I'm Mike Howell, and welcome to another broadcast with the Vancouver Courier newspaper. We are live streaming from Creekside Community Center on the grounds of the former Olympic Village. And Neve O'Connor from the Courier is joining me, and our guest today is Mayor Gregor Robertson. Thanks for coming.
Good to be here.
Over the better part of an hour, we're going to ask you questions about your re-election bid. So I guess we'll start by asking you, you've been in office for 6 years now, and you're seeking a third term. Aren't you tired of the job yet? Why are you seeking a third term?
Definitely excited about a third term, which I think offers a real opportunity to continue to get the work done we've been focused on for the last 6 years. Things definitely don't happen overnight in government, and it's really important, I think, to have a steady, experienced team, be able to work on a body of work for a consistent period of time. We had a lot of turnover, several terms of one-term mayors prior to myself and the vision team coming, which was a lot of upheaval. Not a lot got accomplished, and we ended up having to clean up a lot of messes in our first couple of years. I see real potential in continuing the work for this next term on affordable housing in particular. We're just starting to move the needle, getting rental housing built and making progress on homelessness. It's very difficult dealing with affordability and challenges like homelessness in the downtown east side, but we have to stay very much focused on those and completing the work to get going on the Broadway subway. It's been years of pushing hard to get that as a top priority regionally, and we're there now. We have a referendum in the spring, and I want to be sure to be driving that success, making sure these projects are advancing in the next few years, rather than sliding back into an inexperienced NPA government, which would be the alternative, realistically, which I think would probably undo a lot of the progress we've made over the last 6 years.
Okay. I want to go back to 2008 when you first ran for mayor. I know in several mayoral debates, I think including one that we hosted at Science World with Peter Ladner, you were mentioning that you wanted to become mayor of the city to improve lives for people in the city. So I guess after 6 years, the question is, whose lives have been improved under a Vision Vancouver administration? Is it the poor? Is it the middle class? Is it the rich? Who is the city better for after 6 years?
Well, I think that the goal is that across the board, it's a better city for all people, and that we achieve more equity and more opportunity regardless of your income, your background. And that's really, I think, at the core of Vancouver's values, is being inclusive and creating opportunity for everyone. So we've certainly made an enormous difference in the lives of the most vulnerable. There's still people suffering, there's no doubt about that. But we're closing in on 1,000 people moving from the street into shelters and housing, which is a huge improvement from prior years when it was going the other way. There's still a lot of people on the street, but we've made good headway on that. And that said, on the high end, a lot of people who've owned homes in Vancouver have done very well in these recent years as the market continues to escalate. It's really the biggest challenge, I think, will continue to be the low and middle income and making sure people on middle incomes can actually live in Vancouver, which is why our focus on rental housing and childcare and transit are critical, because we've seen young people leaving because they can't afford to stay here, who have decent jobs. We've seen people when they start families have to move out because they can't afford a larger space. So those are the pieces we need to focus on, and I don't hear that focus from my competitors, and that's why I think it's important that Vision continue the work.
Yeah, you made some references to homelessness there. Now, I know when I talked to you back, I think we were sitting at your kitchen table back in 2008, and you brought up the name of Mr. Machasko.
Daryl McCaskill, yeah.
Yeah, so maybe you remind the viewers who he was, and I know that was a big part of your reason to resign as an MLA and get involved locally.
Yeah, Daryl McCaskill was a homeless man who died, who burned to death very close to City Hall, fairly close to here, in an alley on a very cold night. The nearest shelters were full, and he was sleeping out there with his girlfriend, and they lit a a little fire in their camp stove to keep warm, and she survived, fortunately, but he didn't. And that was, and you know, a death on our streets is one thing when it goes virtually unnoticed. The mayor at the time didn't say anything about it, didn't express outrage. We didn't hear anything really from the province. It was like a hopeless situation with homelessness had just gone up and up and up, and now, you know, people were literally dying on our streets. And that was the tipping point for me in realizing that we had to have a mayor who was committed to changing that course and being there for people who are most vulnerable. We still, we still need a stronger commitment from the BC government and the federal government. They are largely responsible for social housing and healthcare. They've done more in recent years than in the past, so it's been a positive trend, and the partnership has delivered results. But we need everyone to step up to the next level. We still have people on the street. Even after I took office, we had a woman whose street name was Tracy die in a similar type tragedy downtown, right close to where the Howe Street interim housing is going to open up in the weeks ahead. So, you know, there's still big challenges and tragedies. We can't accept that. We absolutely can't. So
let's continue on that with homelessness. I know I do recall at the Science World in 2008, not for the debate, but after a Vision nomination meeting, that's where you made a speech and you were talking about homelessness. And I remember you saying, we're going to end homelessness, people. Now, I take it that you meant street homelessness, that you weren't talking specifically about all homeless people. You're talking about street homelessness at that point, because I don't remember you saying we're going to end street homelessness.
Yeah, well, there's two levels here. Street homelessness, obviously people that sleep outside, living rough on the street. And that's the initial goal set. And the target that was set was by 2015, making sure that everyone who's on the street or outside can get inside, that there is capacity in our housing and shelter stock. That's the first bar we have to get over. So no one's forced to sleep outside. But ultimately ending homelessness, so people aren't living in shelters and vans and cars and sleeping on couches, couch surfing. That has to be the longer term goal, which is built into the city's overall plan right now for affordable housing with the target of 2021. That's a much bigger goal. We're now over 1,800. The number of street homeless has dropped, and it's fluctuated in the 6 years I've been in office. We got it down to 154 a couple of years ago, and it's bounced back up in the last 2 years. But the overall number of homeless people has gone up now to 1,800 or so, and across the region, same thing. It's proving very difficult because we're not collectively building enough social housing to address that need.
But I just wanted to clarify. So when you said you wanted to end homelessness, is that a matter of semantics? Like you're meaning to get people off the street when you made the speech 6 years ago? Is that kind of
right?
That's the focus. So now the goal, I mean, that you've promised is ending street homelessness by 2015.
Mm-hmm.
But if I understand this correctly, the next homeless count is not done till March.
Right.
And so we won't really know if you've ended street homelessness by maybe April or May of next year. It's not going to be January 1st and you're going to know because there's no count, correct? So we probably won't know until April or May whether you've met your goal. Is that?
Yeah. What will be a good indicator this winter is whether there is some capacity in our shelter system and housing units that continue to come available. We have the last count last March was about 538 people. And right now, well, we've opened a couple hundred units up since then of social housing. We've got over 400 more units opening up in the next 2 months. And we've got shelter capacity opening as well. So on paper anyway, it looks like enough capacity is opening between now and the end of the year that everyone should have an opportunity to move inside. We won't know for sure if all that space is taken up. There may still be some people outside. Some may be choosing to do that. But if there are people still outside who don't have nowhere to go, then we've got a problem there. And that's where we keep putting pressure on BC Housing and the federal government to step up with us. We're willing to keep doing more. We bought this building for the next couple of years on Howe Street. We've got other opportunities that we'd like to advance. We need those partners to be there with us.
Mm-hmm. So just to be clear though, so because I know that people media, the public are going to come to you January 1st and say, so have we ended street homelessness? And what are you going to tell them?
Well, ideally, we're saying yes. We've got space in the system now. There's space in our shelters. Anyone who wants to come inside can.
Yeah.
And our outreach teams are doing the good work on the street and making sure that everyone has the opportunity and the connection to get inside. We just have to keep going on this full tilt. The scary thing is that what I'm hearing from Mr. Lapointe and the NPA, in addition to the votes against social housing this term, over 500 units that they said no to. Fortunately, they weren't in the majority, or we wouldn't be getting those units of housing.
Yeah.
But there is not a commitment to doing this work, to seeing this work through. And my goal is to go flat out to the end of the year, see if we can get everyone in with all the housing and shelter space opening.
Yeah.
And at that point, we just continue. There's no slowing down on this. As long as I'm mayor, I'm going to keep pressing as hard as I can.
Do you have an actual date though? That's what because that's what people I think want to know, the viewers want to know, is that should we expect a more accurate count of whether we still have street homelessness or not? Should we wait until the March homeless count, or are you going to be able to tell us January 1st where we are?
Well, we'll definitely have an indication on January 1st based on what's open.
Okay.
and whether there's space in shelters for anyone else who's outside. And I'm very hopeful that we get there, that we do have capacity for anybody who needs to come in. Then validation would be in March. We'll understand exactly what's happening later in the winter.
Okay.
Well, in this vein, the city held a meeting last night to talk to residents who were concerned about the opening of the former Kettle of Fish as a shelter and the Quality Inn on Howe Street as a temporary housing. We had a reporter there, and obviously we understand that not all residents are happy about this. So what would you say to those residents?
Well, I'd say to those residents, it's important that we get everyone in off the street. And in that neighborhood, there are homeless people. You see lots of young homeless people on Granville Street in recent months. That's become a much bigger issue than it was even a couple of years ago, an influx of young people living on Granville and Davie Street again. We have had shelters open in that neighborhood over the last 6 years. We've had winter shelters that have been quite successful. We had initial problems the first year close by there with two shelters that were right across an alley from each other. And we resolved that, closed one, and dealt with the challenges there. But since that time, I think we've had good success with those shelters. The operator at the Howe Street housing project has had great success at Hastings and Renfrew in the old hotel there that's now social housing. And they've worked very well with the neighborhood. That was a very angry neighborhood when we tried to open that, and now it's worked out very well. So I think we don't really have a choice. We have to get people inside and create that opportunity, and that means every neighborhood has to work through any issues that are there.
Are you confident that there won't be very many issues, or that they will be addressed? Can you reassure residents?
Yeah, I'm given the challenge that we have and the organization that will be operating, who's been very successful in their other projects, I'm very confident that any issues will be addressed immediately, and we're not going to see real problems there. I understand there are some people in the neighborhood that are concerned about it. I believe that actually the majority of that neighborhood supports it and would rather see people inside and living in a safe, warm place versus outside and on the street.
Well, with respect to that, are you confident that all the people who were camped out at Oppenheimer Park have found shelter or temporary or permanent housing? And how are you tracking that? Well,
there was a ton of work done by outreach workers over the several months that the tent camp was there, and their count was almost 150 people moved from the park into housing and shelter, which is good news for those people. We definitely saw some people move back into their SROs or apartments that they'd been living in previously. I think it was actually quite a comfortable park to live in the summer. We had a beautiful summer, and it was a nice community in the park there for some time. But as the weather turned and things degenerated, and there was more of a criminal element moving into the park, I think we saw people moving back into those that had places to live move back to their places, and others who are probably still homeless move back to their friends or relatives or wherever they could find a space. So I think it was a mix coming out of that, but it was a big influx that did make it into shelter housing.
Are you tracking everyone though? Like, is anybody left on the street that you know of?
It's the tracking is done by BC Housing primarily, and the city's outreach workers complement that. So there's a common, they collaborate to keep track of everyone who's outside on the street. Not always the easiest thing to do, but there's been a lot of progress in better tracking systems and identifying people that do need the support. The bigger challenge is that there just isn't enough housing. You know, we have 2 big BC Housing projects opening a couple blocks from Oppenheimer Park in the months ahead, and would have been nice if those had been open months ago as planned, and they would have taken in a lot of the people who were in the park, but those are still coming on stream. And
Those are the ones on Princess.
on Princess, right?
Yeah. Let's shift and talk about affordable housing. I know this has been a top issue for your party for many years. And I've also heard you say many times that there's just not enough input there from financially from the province or the Fed. So you guys decided to go it alone with the STIR program and Rental 100.
Mm-hmm.
There hasn't been rental housing built in the city for a long, long time. And then developers would say it's because they don't have tax incentives, et cetera. So you went ahead with this STIR program, and now it's the Rental 100 program. But there are places that are in the downtown, the standard being $1,400 a month for a studio apartment. So a lot of people would say, well, that's not affordable.
Mm-hmm.
So what do you say to those people who say, yeah, I'm glad that the city's building more rental housing, but I can't really afford to live in it anyway?
Right. Well, the key piece is to create more rental supply. We've had huge constraints on the supply of rental housing, which has put vacancy at basically zero for many years now, and driven the cost, the rents up in the process, and pushed people out who just couldn't find a place to rent. So now having supply, it's brand new purpose-built rental housing. So lots of it does come in on the higher end of current rents because they're brand new buildings, but it creates capacity. When we approve projects in the West End, the Beach Towers project being one, people express that concern about the rents, and when the owner of that site opened the doors for expressions of interest, most of the people that came looking for place actually live in the West End, right around that new building. Mm-hmm. So, but they could afford a little more, so they'll vacate a space that's more affordable for someone else to move into in the neighborhood as they can step up. But there just wasn't any newer space in the West End available to rent for many years. So our goal is to create more capacity. When we can get affordability in some of these projects, given the rezoning advantage, then we go after that. We get lower market rates. When we use city land, which is a separate program that our affordable housing agency is now going to focus on, with city-owned land, we can actually get below market rents. We can make affordability a key element of those properties that are leased to operators on city land. So we just try and get an array of new rental. The important thing is the supply, and then as much affordability as we can build into that based on the value that's captured off of that land. But that's, we had the NPA voting against over 900 units of rental housing this term, not interested in seeing rental housing built, which is a catastrophe for people in middle incomes right now who can't afford to buy a place and definitely need access to more rental housing. We're one of the few cities that have innovated and taken this step to get incentives and rental housing built, and it's working. 1,000 units a year is the pace that we're on now.
Well, it's working, but there's also a short-term incentive, the key word being short-term incentive program, rental program, incentive being the key word.
Right.
Developers are, are getting waived at $630,000 in certain fees, and then their application fast-tracked and that. There's been criticism, and you've heard it, that this is kind of a windfall for developers, this program. What would you say to that?
Well, I don't describe it as a windfall. I think they have enough incentive to actually do the projects instead of doing condo developments or instead of going and building in other cities. So our goal was to keep it lean. One of the biggest incentives is reducing the parking requirements in these buildings, and we want them close to transit, where people won't actually need to have a car necessarily. They can walk and take transit, and that means great savings in terms of building parkades. So that's been a big piece of the incentive that I think works for everybody, and probably long overdue in Vancouver. But I think it's making deals that ensure we get the housing built. The developers still, I think, would rather build condos in most cases. There's more money to be made at that. But with that incentive, it's just enough for them to opt for rental, and that creates value for the city. Make sure that we have people on middle incomes can stay and live and work in the city.
Okay. Just one more question on the on housing. I know I'm just looking back at your 2008 platform. Came across this. It says the city will encourage property owners and strata councils to unlock vacant condo units as rental properties. So has that happened?
We haven't had success with the strata piece, which is related to provincial. The strata laws are governed provincially.
Yeah.
We have now pursued a course with empty homes, and actually backed off on that initial step around a speculator tax.
Right.
What we've done is create an affordable housing agency to go out and gather all the data so we can make an evidence-based decision on whether we put a tax on empty homes or flip it around and we create a savings for people who are renting or living in their homes, much like a homeowner's grant.
Sure.
So there are tools like that we want our staff to report back and say, here's what's happening on the ground in Vancouver for empty homes, and here are the tools that would do the best job of addressing that. Other cities have taken steps, whether it's in Australia or you certainly see it in Asia, Hong Kong, more severe examples of that.
Yeah.
We want to be sure the steps that we take make sense for Vancouver, and that's going to be important work. And again, was voted against by the NPA. Although they've been wishy-washy on this now, Mr. Lapointe seems to say he would like to see the data, but his councillors voted against this some months ago. So it's confusion on the empty homes issue with the NPA, like many other things.
But I guess just so the viewers are clear, I mean, when you say the NPA's voted against these different, whether it be housing, that kind of thing, you're talking about a bigger report, and these are amendments that maybe they wanted to introduce, and because the amendments were shot down, then they voted against it. So it's not a question like, do you support more rental housing? No, and vote against it. It's not that simple.
Well, I would argue that some of these issues, homelessness and affordable housing for sure, should not be political issues.
Right.
And there may be debate about exactly what tool you use, but when city staff who are experts on these subjects, and they've gone out and talked to other experts in other cities, they come back to council and say, here's the best option for council to take.
Yeah.
I don't think that should be politicized and say, no, well, we disagree. The NPA are not experts in affordable housing and homelessness, and certainly have not made it a focus historically, which is why we're into a crunch. But I think, I really appreciate the work that city staff do. They do exhaustive research, and they bring that back to council. And in these situations, it's not political. It's trying to make a good business decision that serves taxpayers and creates housing for people who need it.
Okay. We're going to talk about
All right.
neighborhoods.
Yeah, let's talk about neighborhoods now. The city's faced numerous lawsuits since you've become mayor, and from residents who are concerned about changes happening in their neighborhood, such as the Point Grey bike lane. I can't recall a government being taken to court this much. So what does that say about the way the city's being run?
Well, I think it says more about the political agenda of some of these people. And, some of these cases are being thrown out of court, and the city's being awarded costs by the judge because they're nuisance cases, effectively. They're very political. So there's a range of it looks like a political strategy to tangle the city up and make everything look more controversial. And that said, I can't comment on the contents of some of the cases that are in process right now. But I think the bigger concern is we do work out a lot of these issues through very public process, through consultation, engagement, public hearings that go by the letter of the law, and that we've expanded quite dramatically in the 6 years because there's a heightened concern about development and density in Vancouver, we're forced to have this scale of growth. We have a very limited land base, and I think, it's a sensitive issue. It's unfortunate when people feel like they have to resort to the courts and legal action, but I think it's a real mix of what is actually motivating that.
But I mean, Vision has been criticized a lot by some residents who feel like you're not consulting properly, and they either feel that the deal's been done before it's been brought to residents for feedback, or when they do give feedback, they feel like their feedback isn't considered genuine. What would you say to those residents?
Well, I think it's all about continuing to improve the process. We have done, as I said, a lot more engagement and consultation. We've improved the process in terms of early input from residents. We rely on the community plans that have been built in many different neighborhoods for the guidelines for rezoning. So there will always be people who don't want any change, who don't want more density or rezoning, who don't like the look or the architecture, who don't like the impact of a project. And I respect that. People can certainly have that opinion. When it comes to blaming the process, I think we have to be careful, because we had a process in place for many years. Vision has come in and actually added to the process, tried to make it better and improve it. We still have people that are either blaming the process or just don't like the outcome of the decision. And I respect their input, but as a council, we have to make decisions to deal with the whole city and the bigger challenges we have to create more housing and in certain parts of the city.
Sure, but there are groups like the Coalition of Vancouver Neighborhoods, which has been formed by 25 resident groups, which obviously is a lot. They don't feel they've been listened to, and they want to influence planning and development. So what do you say to groups like that? And second point, will you endorse their goals and principles document? Because I know they've asked Vision, and Vision so far hasn't.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of politics at work in that, and people have different opinions about growth. Quite a few of the members and associations are not supportive of growth, or they're supportive of very little growth, certainly not enough to deal with the pressure that we're facing. And the only way to address affordability in Vancouver is to add density and to try and get savings through using city land or rezonings. We don't really have a lot of choices here. So there are residents and associations and neighborhoods that speak out, and I appreciate that. It's great that they are presenting that view. I still believe that most people in Vancouver, the majority of people, understand we have to add more density and more housing, more business opportunities in the city. We try and do that as thoughtfully and carefully as we can with an open process. And there's always going to be some disagreement about that. But we certainly have loud voices from some neighborhoods and certain people who have organized that.
Do you think then that group is completely politically motivated? And again, I'm assuming from your comments that you're not going to sign or endorse their documents. So
yeah,
perhaps you could explain that.
Yeah, well, I think it's a mix. Obviously, not everyone there is politically motivated, but I certainly know a number of them who are regulars at City Hall or have been campaigned against me in the last election under the Neighborhoods for Sustainable Vancouver party. So there's a mix, and that's why it's not. I'm not going to say it's all political, but there's a mix of politics there, and I think the principles. I think many of them are worthy, but overall, it's not. It doesn't align with the city's existing policy, and where I believe we need to go to address affordability.
Okay, a couple of days ago, you released your full platform. There was something in there that I wanted to talk to you about. Just a promise in there to talk about a participatory budget pilot program. Can you explain what that is? Yeah,
participatory budgeting is an opportunity for citizens to actually have a budget that is they allocate on their in their neighborhood, and in this case, having capital dollars to apply to community center projects or neighborhood-based projects is what's envisioned. It's happened in a number of other cities where there's a carve out of a capital budget, and neighborhoods can bring people together and decide, well, should this go into improving a soccer field or improving the daycare, adding on to a community center or neighborhood house. But they can decide more directly where the dollars are applied. I think most of the dollars within the capital plan are spoken for.
Yeah.
They go into the city's infrastructure, and that all needs to be maintained, and priorities that have been agreed to for many years by people across Vancouver and the city staff working with them. But this is starting down a path of more participation, more direct input from citizens in their neighborhood to target those dollars to what's needed most.
So is that in answer to what Niamh was talking about, that not everybody's politically motivated in their neighborhoods, they're just concerned about change? So is this a response to that for those residents who are not politically motivated but just see their neighborhood changing?
Yeah,
They want some more input at City Hall.
yeah, I think it is that it's giving some local control on specific issues. Some of the more detailed items, I think, they're easier for the neighborhoods to identify than for council and staff, who are generally focused on much bigger projects and infrastructure. And I think it's an approach that's working in a number of other cities now. We've seen participatory budgeting coming into a number of places and proving to be a successful way for neighborhoods to shape their destiny a little more directly. But more on the immediate amenities. An interesting parallel to it is the Greenest City grants that we created, that are a pool of small grants for neighborhoods and individuals in neighborhoods to apply to do small community gardens or composting facilities, a whole bunch of small projects that have been, they're kind of pilot projects in neighborhoods that have been very successful. The Vancouver Foundation is the partner that administers all that, but it's been really successful in creating a lot of small solutions in neighborhoods. And I think the participatory budgeting is a kind of parallel version of that, giving neighborhoods some resources to do more projects unique to their neighborhood that they decide.
Okay, I want to shift and talk about Kinder Morgan. I know that you spend a great deal of time, your party spent a great deal of time campaigning against Kinder Morgan's proposal for another pipeline. They say it's 20, but it's not really 20, it's another pipeline.
It is.
And I know your critics have said, well, the mayor is spending way too much time on this because it's out of his jurisdiction. So what do you say to those critics who say that the city doesn't really have any power here to stop a pipeline or stop tankers from going up and down the inlet?
Well, we don't make the decision directly, but our voices are our power. And as the leaders of the city, it's our responsibility to ensure the voices of Vancouver are heard in Ottawa. There's a federal government-run process with the National Energy Board that recently approved the pipeline in the north, the Northern Gateway Enbridge pipeline proposal. And then they've dramatically stripped back the public process for the Kinder Morgan hearings and shut out over half of the voices that were trying to intervene and be part of that hearing process. So, I am absolutely against the proposal and 340 more tankers every year in our waters here. I think it's an enormous threat to our economy and our environment, and I don't see any benefit for Vancouver in this. I just see a ton of risk, and it doesn't make sense to me. It's the biggest threat that we have currently to the health of our city, and the process is broken. So we are interveners. We're very concerned about people being shut out of that process and that being a fair process. We're seeing our neighbors in Burnaby fighting against this, the First Nations on whose land we're living, fighting against this as well. And we didn't see climate change or the negative economic impacts included in any of the deliberations of this hearing process.
I know some of your critics, and Mr. Lafointe being one of them, is pointing out that tanker traffic has increased in the 6 years that you've been mayor, and he says, well, we're only hearing him on this now. Why why now? Why weren't you being loud about this 2008, 2009, seeing the tanker traffic increasingly in that?
As soon as we realized how much the tanker traffic grew in prior years to Vision taking office, and this was really precipitated by the disaster in the Gulf, the big oil spill down in the U.S.
Yeah.
off of Texas and Florida, Louisiana, that was unbelievably destructive. At that point, there was questions asked. Well, there are oil tankers now starting to scale up in our harbor, and when we asked for experts and the operators to come in and tell us what was going on, we realized in a public meeting that they'd actually been building up their export shipments, and then this proposal started to come forward. So we've been expressing our concerns about this from the moment we realized the scale of export that was planned. We've been very vocal. I've been totally upfront and clear in my position of being against scaling up these exports. That said, the industry is doing it. They are doing it within the rules set by the federal government right now, and I'm very worried about it. I'm even more worried that the NPA doesn't seem to matter. They seem to trust the industry, trust the federal government. I think they're on the side of big oil in this, and I'm concerned that their campaign is funded by big oil in part, and we won't know that until they disclose who their funders are. And even then, it could be difficult to dissect, but it's a real concern. I think most Vancouverites in their gut know that this is a big danger for Vancouver, and should be very worried about the NPA just letting it happen and not taking a stand.
Talking about oil and gas.
Well, let's talk about Chevron. You were at a press conference earlier this week with Patty Backus, who's also running for re-election for the school board. And Vision had said it will continue to uphold the BSB's policy on limiting corporate sponsorship in our schools. Can you explain what limited means, and also what is good corporate money and bad corporate money? I mean, you accept casino money for your campaigns, you accept developer money. So if you could answer those two questions.
Right. Well, first on the school board policy, which basically states that that donations will be accepted into the school board if they don't have strings attached to them, if they don't want to meddle in the curriculum and the teaching in the classroom. And the Chevron proposal of funding actually included being right into the classroom and changing what happens in the classroom with teachers, and that's unacceptable. I think that having
Can you be
a
more
corporate
specific
entity
on that? Because I think people really want that question answered. What was Chevron looking for? Because as I understand it, there were no strings, and maybe I'm wrong in that, and feel free to correct me. So what was Chevron demanding?
My understanding is that it was a program where if kids and their parents were buying more gas from Chevron, that more dollars would flow to their school and their classroom, and that would actually be promoted within the classroom, and some materials to actually talk about Chevron and the oil and energy industry and what it does, that becomes part of the package. But there are actually incentives to raise money based on the kids getting their parents to buy gas at Chevron, which is a very direct intervention in our schools.
But you're saying there would be advertising in the classroom, because my understanding there wasn't, and I could be wrong. You're saying there would have been advertising in the classroom?
I don't know about specific advertising and materials. All I know is that there is a direct connection of the funding to kids and families buying gas at Chevron.
But the actual money would be administered by a charity.
I would assume so.
My Class Needs, I believe it's called.
Yeah, I would assume that it goes through a charitable organization, as with most of those donations, but it clearly didn't fit the existing school board policy. So it's a difference of opinion. I think Vision does not want any strings attached. If corporations or unions or individuals want to fund our school system and provide resources, they can't expect to be in the classroom and affecting the learning environment and what's being taught. So
would you accept money from Chevron if there were no strings attached, as you say? Would it be acceptable at all from Chevron? What
I've heard Patty Backus and our school board trustees say is that they would if there were no strings attached. That is the policy. If it's pure philanthropy, then that's acceptable. And money into the school system is much needed. But if there's strings attached to what the kids are learning and doing, then it's against the policy. And the NPA clearly doesn't agree and would look to be fundraising with those strings attached.
Again, as obviously the school board is cash strapped. So maybe come back to the question about what is good and bad corporate money.
Well, I don't think it's good or bad corporate money. It's more what is connected to the money and whether there's influence and impact on the classroom as a result of that money. And that's what we, I think, want to be careful of most. But I really appreciate the work the school board's done to advocate for our public schools, to not close schools. Again, the NPA was voting to close schools. We're not sure which schools they want to close, but I know Fraser Ballantyne was on record as saying several high schools and elementaries should be closed. Vision has fought really hard to protect the funding and to make sure seismic dollars are delivered to get our schools up to seismic code, and we don't see that kind of leadership from the NPA. So I'm proud of the work they've done to keep it public and to find partners. I mean, we're willing to partner with the school board on the breakfast program and directly invest, much as the city does grants to community in the school system to make sure that kids can get hot breakfast and lunch. And we have clear dollars that will commit to that in our platform. The NPA says maybe they'll figure out some money too, but there's no specifics.
All right. Well, let's move on to another important issue of transportation.
Yeah, correct me if I'm wrong, but I hear that you want a subway built to one.
You got it.
Yes or no?
Yes.
All
Absolutely.
right, we got a yes or no question out of him. Excellent. But something that Mr. Lapointe has criticized you for over and over again is that he says he's not meeting with Ottawa, he's not meeting with Victoria. He has no guarantees on this. This is disingenuous. Why do you keep telling the public that you want a subway and making it sound as if the city's going to build this subway? So I guess for the record, have you met with the province? Have you met with the feds? Who have you met with? And what have they told you? Is the money coming?
Yes. Well, it's bizarre for Mr. Lapointe to level those accusations. He has no idea. He hasn't been involved in politics yet in his life directly. I've been meeting with Premier, Prime Minister, Ministers of Transportation, both federally and provincially, for years, and promoting the Broadway subway, explaining the business case for the Broadway subway and the need for the whole region to have a plan going forward to invest in better buses and light rail in Surrey. I'm a big supporter of as well. So I've had one-on-one meetings. We've had team meetings with groups of mayors and ministers for years. I'm the chair of the Big City Mayors across Canada and meet with ministers in that capacity as well, and championing the need for transit in cities across the country.
What are they telling you?
Well, the provincial and federal government have not been moving a lot of infrastructure dollars into cities in recent years. We had a little bit of funding from the infrastructure stimulus, but we haven't had investments coming for a number of years while they deal with their deficit issues and the big debts that they've run. So we're looking at budgets going into the black at both provincial and federal levels. There's a $14 billion infrastructure fund now federally that we expect to have a share of here in Vancouver to deploy particularly into transit. And the 10-year plan that 22 mayors across the region have agreed to, that includes a Broadway subway underground, black and white in the plan. And Mr. Lapointe is being just all over the map on this. And it's a huge risk to have someone with no experience at this come in and be negative, accusational, and inaccurate. I mean, having no idea where the Broadway subway even started when he put out his press release last week is astounding. I couldn't believe it. When we have a referendum from the province in a couple of months, we have to be doing everything in our power to make sure that referendum is approved, passes, and we get funding for transit, and we can get started on the Broadway subway and improve buses all over the region as well. But
even if you get that approval and Transportation Minister Stone says, yeah, we like the package and we like what you're promoting, this is how we're going to pay for it. It'll take several years to get a subway built. So this is something I've asked you before, but I want the viewers to hear your answer to this. The Evergreen line will be completed summer of 2016.
Right.
Your own transportation director from the city, Jerry Doyle-Bravonia, said that will mean probably a 25% increase in riders being dumped at Commercial and Broadway. So as a mayor, what can you do to address that problem and prepare for it before 2016? Because it gives you a bit of time, but you already know it's chaotic there.
Right.
So what do you do?
Well, that's part of our predicament and why it's unfortunate that it's taken this long for all the partners to come to the table and get going on the Broadway subway, because that capacity is going to be increased. And there are investments taking place at Commercial and Broadway to deal with more people flowing through that station. It's the busiest transit hub in the province right now, and it's only going to get busier. So it's up to TransLink to figure out how to mitigate that challenge. The most recent steps have been painting lanes on the B-line access points along Broadway there, which seems to have helped a little bit.
Yeah.
But I'm really concerned about the overall impact, and that's why I've been making noise for years about the Broadway subway, because we are going to be in a much more difficult situation with more people coming from the Northeast and the Tri-Cities, and we haven't built out the East-West axis.
But would more buses actually do it? Wouldn't that just lead to more congestion? Is more buses the answer, short-term answer? I mean, is that going to help?
No, we've been, our transportation folks at the city have been working with TransLink to maximize the Broadway bus flow. It's basically at the max. It's the busiest bus route in North America now, and there isn't much more capacity that's possible to add there.
Yeah.
We're chock-a-block, and they're continuing to look at opportunities before the Broadway subway is built to get a little bit more capacity and run more B lines. We've added more capacity on parallel streets, but 49th is extremely busy, and we're seeing pass-ups on 49th now at unacceptable levels. 4th and 41st, 25th, they're all busy bus routes now, because we don't have the east-west axis built farther west, and so it'll be a challenge. And the only way to deal with it is to try and add capacity through the entire east-west flow. But until we build the Broadway subway, we will be in a crunch and trying to get people in and out of the city.
Okay. So how are we doing for time? We got about 10 minutes left.
Well,
Is your water okay?
I'm good.
Okay.
a couple questions about cycling, which is always a popular issue among our readers. Are we going to see more separated bike lanes in Vancouver?
Well, I'd say most of the separated bike lane network is now built. The overall network for the city is basically in place. There are a few gaps, there are a few connections that need to be improved. The False Creek bridges are a big part of the next capital plan, and improving, doing the rest of the renovations on the Burrard Bridge in particular, but Granville and Cambie as well need significant investments. So we'll see those connections improved, and the major bike arterials right now, the Adanax, 10th, Ontario, those major routes that are kind of swamped now because the bike traffic is so much higher. There's so many more people riding. There are improvements that need to be made on those major routes just to get them up to as safe and convenient as possible for riders of all ages and abilities. That's the goal. So it's improvements to the existing network primarily.
Sure. Also in Vision's 2008 platform, you promised to create a rentable bike program. Are we ever going to see that?
Yeah, the bike share is still just beyond our grasp. We thought we were close, and then the contractor that we have been working on the supply with had financial difficulties. A company called Bixby, and New York and Chicago both procured their systems at the same time that we were in the queue. So we held off while they sort out their financial issues. I'm hopeful that we see it in 2015. But my commitment is that we don't end up in a financial situation that is unfavorable for Vancouver. Some cities have had federal money. They've had other subsidies come to the table. Here it's between the city and sponsors to cover the costs and capital cost. And effectively, it's part of the public transportation system once it's built and in place. But we want to be sure that we've mitigated the risk to taxpayers on this. And I think the system will work great. We just want to be sure the finances are very clear. And I'm expecting we're going to get there next year.
Okay, I know we haven't got a lot of time, but I wanted to get to this issue that Mr. Lapointe on Monday at the debate at Shaw said that affordability is no longer the top issue. And the top issue for him, he says, is the fact that your councillor, Vision Councillor Jeff Meggs, made a pitch to QP Local 1004 for money after promising that you, Mr. Mayor, recommitted to not contracting out services. Lapointe suggests that the deal with QP 1004 was intended to buy votes. So I guess for the record, what happened with that pitch, and are the hands of the city tied to not contracting out as Mr. Lapointe suggested?
Yeah, well, first and foremost, I can't believe Mr. Lapointe says affordable housing is not the number one priority in Vancouver. That's all I hear is the importance of affordability in Vancouver, and I don't agree with him. I think it is the most important piece. On the QP 1004 issue, I have for all of my years as mayor and prior to that, being committed to the principle that we don't contract out public services in Vancouver. I've been very clear about that all along, and I continue to be committed to that as our policy. That said, we do negotiate collective bargaining agreements. Collective bargaining is our actual bottom line. Mm-hmm. So the negotiations between the city and the unions follow along that process, and that's ultimately what we rely upon. But as mayor, I am committed to keeping services in-house at the city. We have a mix right now, and I don't see a need to change that. I think our city workers do a great job, and we get good value out of that. We've gotten great efficiencies and cost savings over the past 6 years working with the unions and having a very respectful relationship, in contrast to the war with the unions the NPA had prior to 2008 and the garbage strike that we had, and a very different approach battling with unions that I think does not serve the city. And I worry that Mr. Lapointe's his flagging this is basically signaling he's got a secret agenda to privatize public services in Vancouver. I think that's where this is going. I'm not interested in doing that. I'm interested in keeping the balance that we have and working positively with our city unions. I think the results have been good on that for 6 years. And I believe that we're looking at a privatization agenda from the NPA.
I'll have to ask him about that. But this relationship between unions and parties, or developers and parties, it puts the politicians such as yourself, I'd say, in a sticky situation. We have to respond to this. And I know that your party and the NPA and COPE and others have worked towards getting some sort of electoral reform. So there would be a ban on union donations, a ban on corporate donations. Mm-hmm. I know tonight, I believe Vision is having a big fundraiser at the Bayshore, and I'm sure unions and developers will be there. So there are some people in the public who have this perception that, well, if I don't donate to the Vision Party or the NPA or someone else, that I will not be treated as favorably at council when I go there as somebody who's actually donating to your party. So what do you say to that? Because I keep hearing that from people, that Vision's in the pockets of the developers or the unions, and you hear that too. So tell the viewers what you make of that. Yeah,
well, it's absolutely not true. We do accept donations from individuals, from business, from labor, across the board. We have the most diverse array of supporters in terms of financial support and enormous volunteer base. That's been our strength in these last couple of elections. And we see that again this time. It's been great to have lots of support and tons of volunteers getting involved. We have called very loud and clearly for an end to corporate and union donations and a cap on donations. Obviously, the NPA donation of almost $1 million from one developer in that past election was a huge concern and an abuse of the system. But we don't see a case for corporate and union donations and the scale of donations. We've called loud and clear to the province on this. They had an opportunity to put that in the Vancouver Charter when they changed the 3 to 4 year term and made some other tweaks to campaign finance rules, but they did not make the changes that we asked for. We have gotten the support of the Union of BC Municipalities. The NPA actually has voted against the campaign finance reforms that Vision has pushed for repeatedly, a number of motions in each term, and we're going to keep pushing for that. It's unacceptable the way that it is, but we play by those rules. We're not going to be disadvantaged in the meantime until we get the rules changed. And the NPA doesn't seem to worry about it. They take big donations and they have voted against making changes to that.
Okay. How are we doing for time, guys? Do you have time for one more?
Sure.
What should we ask you? Why don't we talk about Creekside Park, which is right behind us. Well, it's not a park, actually. It's 9 acres of asphalt. The green light campaign continues. I saw some of the lights on still this morning when I came in. And there was a meeting here last night. I'm sure that issue came up. So when is that park going to be built?
Well, hopefully it's soon. Hopefully we're getting closer now with the changes, potential changes at the Viaducts. We're going to see a report back from staff about the future of the Viaducts in 2015, and there were still some issues to work out with the finances of taking down viaducts and building an arterial route through the neighborhood there, and increasing the park space, adding some housing as well, and tying that neighborhood together much differently. The park decision really will rely on that decision. So we're waiting for the Viaducts piece to come back from staff with recommendations. It looks favorable, but the numbers have to work for council to support it. But the last report back looked pretty favorable for the big change there, and that would trigger the reshaping of that Creekside Park and all of that being built in the years ahead. It has been held up by the legal issues with Concord, and that they aren't required to actually invest in that park until they build the last piece of their development area there. And that's just how the legal contracts were drafted in past years. There hasn't been a way to work through that. So we're relying on this change that's possible with the Viaducts to accelerate the park being built, and a much bigger park than what is currently
So I guess
projected.
so if re-elected, then you have 4 years. Can you promise residents that their park will be built over the next 4 years? Can you do that?
I can't promise it because of the legal constraints on it. The money that's tied to the Concord development next door, and the Viaducts question, which is also has significant financial commitments related. And until I know exactly what the cost benefit is for the city, I'm not willing to vote yay or nay on that. But I think what we are going to see is a decision will be made early in the next term around the Viaducts, and that will likely trigger change all around with the Concord land and with the park next door.
Okay, I think that's all the time we have. I want to thank our guest, Mayor Gregor Robertson, for joining us today. Thanks a lot.
Thanks for the opportunity.
And good luck November 15th. That's voting day, by the way, so get out there and vote. Thanks again.